Regular Zoom meetings have a participant limit of 300 attendees. If you're planning to run a virtual event such as a talk or a presentation day, and you're expecting larger numbers of attendees, the paid Zoom webinars or Zoom large meetings add-ons are worth considering. In this video, we'll explore Zoom webinars and take a look at Zoom large meetings in another video. Zoom webinars is great for talks, demonstrations, and other large events where one needs tight control over the audience and the flow of events. By default, audience members are not permitted to start their video and are kept muted at all times. One or more panelists are designated, and those are the only people that the audience members will see or hear from. Think of it as a standard Zoom meeting where many people can attend, but we can only see and hear from a select few in the meeting. Note that webinars does not include breakout rooms at present, so if you're doing a virtual conference or a presentation day where you need multiple talks running concurrently, you'll want to look instead at Zoom large meetings. At present, webinars is billed on the first of every month, and the price you'll pay will depend on the number of attendees you require. Once you've selected an appropriate user tier, log in at jira.uwo.ca/service desk and open a help desk ticket. Enter a summary like Zoom webinars and, in the description field, request that Zoom webinars be added to your account. Specify your Western username along with a speed code and account number to bill. Finally, click Create, and within a day or two, the webinar's license will be added to your account. One thing to keep in mind is that your subscription is not automatically canceled. You'll need to open another help desk ticket when you wish to cancel. Billing is done on the first of every month, and WTS has advised that those wishing to cancel should open a ticket a few days before the end of the month to ensure that their cancellation is processed in time. Once you receive a response from WTS indicating that webinars has been added to your account, log in at zoom.uwo.ca to schedule a webinar. From the left menu bar, select Webinars and click Schedule a Webinar. Fill out the details of your webinar, including its title, date, time, and duration. In many cases, users want to enable registration so that they have an idea of who's attending, so you can check this box to enable that feature. Optionally, you can enable a passcode for the webinar, but since webinars already have strong security settings in place, it's probably easiest for your attendees to forego this option. We'll set the video for our host and panelists to on so that we don't have to manually allow them to start their video on the day of. Leave audio settings set to both to allow participants to either dial in from their phones or use their computer for audio. Next, we may wish to enable the Q&A feature, which we'll look at shortly. Enabling the practice session option allows the host and panelists to get in early to practice with the features of the webinar before the attendees are allowed to join. It's probably a good idea to enable this so that you can get acquainted with the service, but we do recommend nevertheless doing a dress rehearsal in advance of your event so that everyone is familiar with Zoom webinars. Requiring authentication is a good idea. If you're running a Western-only event in which only faculty, staff, or students can attend, then select Western accounts only. If you need to allow external participants, perhaps external collaborators or maybe parents or grandparents attending a student's presentation day, you'll want to select any Zoom account. In either case, it's best to leave authentication as required, forcing all participants to sign up for a Zoom account. External users can sign up for free accounts, so there's no concern that anyone might be asked to pay. By requiring authentication, we give ourselves the ability to ban specific Zoom accounts if they become a problem during the event. If you wish, you can choose to automatically record the webinar to your computer, and you can set restrictions on the countries from which users can join. For example, perhaps we only want to allow users from Canada to join the webinar. In this case, we would leave the radio button here selected and ensure the countries field lists Canada. In this case, I'll forego that restriction. Lastly, you should name one or more alternative hosts in case you're ill on the day of the event. These individuals will be given administrative privileges over the webinar and will be able to start and manage the event and its participants just as you can as host. You don't necessarily want all of your speakers to be alternative hosts. Instead, your alternative hosts can be speakers, but they're also the people you want to manage the crowd. They'll be able to remove attendees from the webinar, promote attendees to panelists or alternative hosts, and so on. For regular speakers, we'll make them panelists in just a moment rather than alternative hosts. Once we're happy with our settings, we'll click Schedule to get the webinar on the books. You'll be taken to the settings page for the webinar. Now, for any speakers who we didn't name as alternative hosts, we'll select Edit beside Invite Panelists to set them up as panelists. If they're Western members, just enter their Western usernames in the name field and click the appropriate autocomplete entry to fill in their details. Once you've added all your panelists, you can leave the checkbox checked to email them an invitation and click Save. Now, if you're confused about the difference between an alternative host and a panelist, Zoom has a document called Roles in a Webinar that presents a matrix highlighting the differences in access. For example, alternative hosts and panelists can join the practice session before the webinar starts if you enabled one. They can all mute and unmute themselves, start and stop their video, share their screen, respond to audience questions, and so on. However, when it comes to managing other participants, only hosts and alternative hosts can mute and unmute other attendees, stop their video, promote a regular attendee to a panelist. Perhaps you have a number of students giving presentations in succession. In this case, you might want to temporarily promote each one to a panelist during the webinar to allow each to give his or her presentation, and then demote them back down to regular attendees after each has given a presentation. Alternative hosts can do this, panelists cannot. So to summarize, panelists are regular speakers, whereas alternative hosts can both speak and perform crowd control operations. On your webinar settings page, you can copy the registration link for the webinar if you enabled registration. If you didn't enable registration, this will instead show the join link for the webinar. Alternatively, you can click Copy Invitation to get the full Zoom invitation to email out to potential attendees. By default, registrations are automatically approved. If you wish instead to manually review and approve them, click Edit and select the Manually Approve option. Optionally, you can have it email you each time someone registers, but if you're expecting many registrants, you may wish to leave this disabled and simply remember to log in periodically and approve registrations. For the questions that registrants will be asked, click the Questions tab. By default, users will be asked for their first and last names and email address. If you need additional information, feel free to check additional boxes as needed, but try to keep the form as short as possible to make registration simple. If you have custom questions to pose to registrants, select Custom Questions and click New Question. Select the question type and type your question text. Be sure not to prompt the user for any sensitive or confidential information. When happy with your settings, click Save All. When a registrant now visits your registration link, they'll be prompted for the information you selected. Refreshing the page, we scroll to the bottom and now we see that we have one registrant. If we opted for manual review and approval of registrations, we'll need to click Edit, check this registrant, and then select Approve or Deny. In some cases, you may wish to export the list of registrants. To do so, select Reports from the left menu bar, select Webinar, Registration Report, and choose the webinar in question. If desired, filter by approved or denied registrants, and click Generate CSV Report. Opening the file in Excel, we can see the list of registrants. There are some other advanced options of Zoom webinars that you may wish to explore. On the Email Settings tab, you can customize the email notifications sent out, choose to send out follow-up emails to attendees after the event, and so on. On the Branding tab, you can add a banner and/or logo to your registration page, specify a web URL to which attendees will be sent after the webinar is over, and optionally prompt attendees with a survey after the webinar concludes. During the webinar, you may wish to poll the audience on the fly for added interactivity or to gauge audience understanding or engagement with the material. While these poll questions can be set up on the fly during the webinar, that's probably not the best time to be rushing to set up questions, so you can set up your poll questions in advance here so that everything is ready for you during your event. We'll take a look at that shortly. Finally, if you enabled the Q&A feature to allow audience members to submit questions during the event, you can tweak the settings on the Q&A tab. Here we can control whether or not to allow users to ask questions anonymously, and whether audience members can see all questions that have been submitted by others or only questions that have been answered. We can also allow the audience to upvote or comment on questions. By allowing them to upvote, you'll be able to see which questions have received the most votes, and therefore you'll know which questions to prioritize if time is tight. To start your webinar, open Zoom and select Meetings. Select your webinar and click Start. Alternatively, from zoom.uwo.ca, click Webinars, and click the Start button beside your webinar, which will launch Zoom and start the webinar. Now, alternative hosts will not be able to start the meeting using either of these methods. Instead, they'll need to use the join link of the webinar that they will have received via email. So just remind your co-hosts that if you happen to be ill on the day of the event, they can still start the meeting by themselves by clicking the join link in the invitation email they received when you added them as hosts. Panelists, on the other hand, cannot start the meeting, only you and your alternative hosts, so make sure that you have at least one other person configured. If you opted to enable the practice session, the webinar will be started in practice mode. Here, alternative hosts and panelists can join and get acquainted with webinars, but attendees are kept waiting. Before starting the webinar, you'll want to verify that your security settings are configured correctly to avoid problems during the session. Click Participants at the bottom if you don't see the list of participants. Then, select the ellipses in the bottom right. The settings shown here are probably a good start. We want to mute all of our panelists upon entry. Of course, regular attendees will be muted as well. We'll allow panelists to unmute themselves. If we uncheck this, we'll have to manually select panelists in the participants list and unmute them ourselves. We'll allow panelists to rename themselves. Perhaps they have a preferred name by which they wish to be shown in the meeting. We'll allow panelists to start their video. If you don't enable this, panelists will receive a notice indicating that they're not allowed to start their video if they tried to do so. We'll allow attendees to raise their hands to ask questions. And finally, we'll follow the host view mode. What this means is that if you as host are in speaker view where only the active speaker is shown, that's the same mode that will be shown to all attendees. Similarly, if you're in grid mode where you can see a grid of all the panelists, attendees will also see this. Now, if you as host are sharing your screen and another panelist is the active speaker, attendees will see a split screen of your screen and the active speaker. This way, I could be controlling a slide deck advancing the slides on behalf of a speaker who's currently talking. Now, if panelists will need to share their screens, perhaps to show audience members a slide deck, you'll want to be sure to allow this. To do so, click the arrow beside Share Screen and select All Panelists under Who Can Share. It's probably fine to leave the second option set to Only Host, so that one panelist cannot interrupt the screen sharing of another. If you didn't enable recording when you created the webinar, you can choose to start recording now by clicking Record. For accessibility, you can also enable auto-transcription of the meeting by selecting Live Transcript, Enable Auto-Transcription. Alternatively, if someone will be manually transcribing the meeting, you can select that individual or choose to transcribe yourself. When you're ready to start, click Start Webinar at the top. It's a good idea to keep the participants list open throughout the webinar. At minimum, you should verify that your panelists have joined and, if needed, email or phone them if they're not in the session. Be sure to check the Attendees tab as well in case you forgot to configure them as panelists. If you find someone who should be a panelist, you can promote them on the fly by clicking More beside their name and clicking Promote to Panelist. The attendee will be temporarily disconnected and will automatically rejoin within a moment as a panelist. This is also a great option if you'll be having attendees giving presentations in succession, maybe a few students giving presentations one after another, and you don't want them to have panelist permissions for the entire webinar. In this case, you can promote them to panelists right before each of them are set to present. Then, when they no longer require the ability to present, you can demote them back to regular attendees by again selecting More beside their name and selecting Change Role to Attendee. Alternatively, if you had forgotten to make someone a co-host, you would first promote them to a panelist, and then click More beside their name and promote them to co-host. They will now be able to both present and manage other participants. If a panelist should be speaking but is currently muted or does not have his or her video on, you can prompt the panelist to unmute or enable video by clicking Ask to Unmute beside their name, or for video, by selecting More, Ask to Start Video. Doing so will pop up a little dialog box on the panelist side asking them to unmute or start their video without interrupting the flow of the webinar. At any time, if a participant, whether panelist or attendee, is somehow being disruptive or inappropriate, you can choose to kick them out of the webinar by selecting More beside their name and selecting Remove. You'll be warned that the user will not be able to rejoin if you continue, and upon clicking Remove, the participant will be kicked and banned. This is why we recommended earlier to require authentication, as it ensures that someone can't just rejoin the webinar with the same Zoom account. Of course, someone could try to rejoin repeatedly with other Zoom accounts, and if that happens, you can also choose to lock the meeting by going to the participants list, selecting the ellipses, and clicking Lock Meeting. This will prevent anyone from joining the webinar, so you should only use this in extreme cases where someone is being very disruptive, joining from multiple accounts, and you're confident that most or all of your legitimate attendees have already joined. Recall that one of the options in the pre-webinar check we performed was to allow attendees to raise their hand. If you've enabled this option, you'll want to keep an eye on the participants list. Notice that when an attendee raises their hand, you'll see an indicator on the Attendees tab. For an attendee with a raised hand, you can allow them to temporarily talk to ask their question by clicking Allow to Talk. You may also wish to click Ask to Unmute to prompt the user to unmute themselves. Then, once they've asked their question, select More, Disable Talking, and More, Lower Hand. Alternatively, you may wish to disable the raising of hands altogether by unchecking this option in the ellipses menu at the bottom. Instead, as long as you enabled the Q&A feature when setting up the webinar, you can direct audience members to click the Q&A button and ask their questions there. When an audience member asks a question, you'll see an indicator on the Q&A button. Clicking this button, you can choose either to answer the question live, in which case you'd respond out loud. Alternatively, you can type an answer to avoid interrupting the flow of the webinar. This is a great option, particularly if you have multiple moderators. While one individual is speaking, others can be scanning the Q&A section and responding to questions. When typing an answer, you can choose to either respond privately to the individual who posed the question, or respond publicly so that everyone can benefit from the response. Assuming you've responded publicly, all answered questions can be seen by all users on the Answered tab. Lastly, you may wish to consider enabling question upvoting, whether you enable it in the Q&A section when first scheduling the meeting on the Zoom website, or here in the webinar by clicking the cog and allowing attendees to view all questions and to upvote them. This allows audience members to upvote an unanswered question posed by one attendee. Allowing attendees to view all questions allows them to see questions posed by everyone else, not just their own questions, helping to reduce duplicate questions. Furthermore, allowing them to upvote others' questions ensures you can prioritize the most popular questions if time is tight and/or you're receiving a lot of questions. To add some interactivity with your audience and gauge their understanding or engagement of the material being covered, you may opt to launch one or more polls during the webinar. Ideally, you would set this up in advance by logging in at zoom.uwo.ca, selecting Webinars, selecting your webinar, clicking Polls/Survey, and clicking Add Poll. It's best to set this up in advance so that you're not fumbling around scrambling to add questions in the middle of a webinar. However, if you forgot to set this up in advance or you think of a quick question you want to ask the audience during the webinar, you can still add poll questions on the fly. To add a question during the webinar, click the Polls button and select Add Question. You'll be taken to the Zoom website where you can enter a title for the poll, such as Test Your Knowledge 1. Then you can add one or more questions to the poll. We'll add a simple question with a few options for the answer. If we wanted, we could add multiple questions to the poll by clicking Add a Question as many times as needed. When finished, click Save. You can also add multiple polls in the event you wish to run several polls throughout the webinar. To do so, click Add Poll to add another poll, and we'll again specify a title such as Test Your Knowledge 2, and another simple question. Finally, click Save. Now, when you're ready to launch your first poll, ensure the correct poll is selected from the drop-down at the top of the window and click Launch Polling. Your participants will now be prompted to answer the questions for the first poll, and you'll see their responses in real time. Be sure to leave them adequate time to respond, perhaps 30 to 60 seconds or more, depending on the number of questions in the poll. When you're ready to wrap up the poll, click End Polling, and if you like, you can share the results with the audience. In this case, they'll see what's in white here pop up on their screens. If you need to redo the poll for some reason, you can click Relaunch Polling. Otherwise, click Stop Sharing Results and close the polling window. Later, when you want to launch your second poll, Click Polls again, select your second poll from the drop-down list, and click Launch Polling. Your audience will again be prompted and you'll see the results in real time. Again, once finished, click End Polling, and optionally choose to share the results with the audience. When you're ready to end your webinar, select End Meeting for All. Upon doing this, all members of the webinar will be disconnected. If you chose to record the meeting, conversion to a video file and an audio file will begin at this time. If you interrupt this process, you can always choose to go back and restart the conversion by selecting Meetings Recorded and clicking the Convert button. Similarly, if you're not sure where the converted video file resides, you can click the Open button and you'll see your converted video file, in this case the MP4 file here, along with an audio-only version of the meeting in the M4A file here. You can ignore the M3U file. It's just a playlist referencing the MP4 file, and it doesn't need to accompany the MP4 file if you're planning to post it or otherwise make it available somewhere. If you chose to transcribe the meeting, you'll also see a closed caption.txt file generated. This will contain the transcript generated by Zoom. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear to be in a format that can be directly used by video players to show closed captions. However, if you were uploading the video to a site like YouTube, you could use this file to assist you in creating the closed captions and avoid having to transcribe all of the content of the webinar manually. To export poll results, you can log in at zoom.uwo.ca, select Reports, Webinar, and choose Poll Report. Then select your webinar and click Generate CSV Report. Opening this file in Excel, you'll see each user along with his or her response to each question. Of course, if you chose to make the poll anonymous, usernames and email addresses would not be displayed. Similarly, if you wish to export the Q&A from the webinar, select Reports, Webinar, and choose Q&A Report. Once again, select your webinar and click Generate CSV Report. Opening this file in Excel, you'll see each question posed, who posed the question, and the answer provided. Feel free to explore the other reports available to you in the Reports section. If you or any audience members encounter problems during a webinar, please contact the WTS Help Desk. Contact information can be found on their website, and they have telephone support available even in the evenings and on weekends. One question that arises frequently is whether STS can have someone sit in on a meeting to provide support. STS is not currently staffed to provide personnel to sit in on meetings, but if this is something you feel you absolutely require for your event, please open a ticket at helpdesk.sci.uwo.ca well in advance of your event, and we may be able to hire a student to assist with basic troubleshooting in your event. In this case, a nominal hourly fee would be passed on to your unit. We hope that this introduction to Zoom webinars has been helpful to you. We've seen how to schedule a webinar, invite panelists, manage attendee registration, start a webinar, ensure it is configured correctly, manage participants, handle Q&A and polls, and export video, poll, and Q&A data at the end of a webinar. Before we wrap up, we'll summarize a few do's and don'ts that we've covered. First off, do open a ticket with WTS and request that Zoom webinars be added to your account well in advance of your event. Don't forget to include the user tier that you require, such as 500 users, along with a speed code and account number to bill. Do invite panelists in advance when setting up your webinar so that you don't have to worry about promoting them during the event. Do set up any poll questions in advance to avoid scrambling to create questions during the event. Do ensure you schedule a dress rehearsal webinar in advance and stress to your panelists that they attend so that they're familiar with the service. Do ensure that you run through the pre-webinar checks we covered in this video to ensure that your security settings are set properly, both to keep the webinar secure and to ensure that panelists are able to be seen and heard and to share their screens. Finally, don't forget to open a ticket with WTS a few days before the end of the month to ensure you're not going to be billed for another month after your event has concluded. With all of this knowledge, you should be all set to run a smooth, successful event, and we hope you enjoy using Zoom webinars.